From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Encyclopedic range of her imagination. Happily, evidence of all of this is at hand in her fiction. The very title of her first novel, the lyrical Waiting in the Future for the Past to Come, reflects a mind that doesn't think in linear or traditional ways. Her most recent novel, The Blue Manuscript, about which I'm sure she's going to talk, is a tale of an archaeological dig in search of the Blue Quran, and it received the imprimatur of the Library Journal, which called it an exceptionally complex, engrossing, and poignant story. She deals with history, geography, language, culture, nations, words, and the contemplation of beautiful things. Lucky for us, she puts a lot of what she knows into her fiction. She's interested in how understanding the past helps us move into the future. So let's move there right now by welcoming Sabiha Al Khemir.
Thank you for that kind introduction. It is a real joy to be here among so many people brought together by the love of books. You've got to see it to believe it. And I'm so happy to see it. I was born in Tunisia. It's a small country in North Africa where Arabic is the first language, French is the second. French happens to be the second because Tunisia was colonized by the French from 1881 to 1956. So when you grow up in Tunisia, speaking two languages, being bilingual means that the other is part of you. But for me to meet the other, I crossed to Englishness. The English language is really foreignness. To actually write in one's third language, it means you are constantly on the bridge. And on the bridge is really where I would like to be. Because apart from my personal story, which meant crossing worlds, moving between cultures, connecting is what I hope my short life on earth can do. Why do I write? Trained as an Islamic art historian. Why do I write fiction? And why do I write about what I write about? I wrote since I was a teenager. I wrote because fiction provides a space of imagination where you can fly, where there is freedom, where there is a world the way you want it to be. And from then on, you know, to be a good child, you've got to do well at school. That doesn't, I hope there aren't many children here listening to this, but I was about to say that doing well at school doesn't mean necessarily, you know, that you've really done well at all. That's a very bad thing to say. But so there were the good grades, you know, and the training as an art historian. And believe me, I was a very bad student of English. The first lesson, which started as, you know, when I was 15 in English, hello, John, what's that? It's a bag. Is it heavy? No, it's not. Where did you come from? From London. I'm pleased you're here. Me too. So, why fiction again? Why write something like the Blue Manuscript, which talks about the Blue Quran? There is a Blue Quran in the Islamic art field, simply called the Blue Quran, because it is the only manuscript which is actually written on blue dyed vellum. It's indigo. there stands out this piece, written in gold, on blue dyed, vellum. It stands out as different. Its difference was very interesting for me, being interested in difference in itself, difference as something to explore, difference in a world which wants us to be all the same. And how boring if we were all the same. Wouldn't you think so? So to celebrate diversity, really, I was very interested in the difference of this manuscript. And why do I write? Not really to be a novelist, but because when you are touched by something deep and profound, something that doesn't want to go away, even when you want it to go away, you want to give it to the world. You want to share it. It says there is a space there that you need to go and explore. You've got work to do because you have become a witness of time. And so, as an art historian, there was this object that touched me very deeply because this manuscript, its pages were separated, each one, sold for financial profit to bring more money. This was sold one page at a time. This manuscript, which was written by a calligrapher, in the 10th century, its pages separated between America, the rest of Europe. In the 20th century, this is the material culture of Islam. What a metaphor that is. What a metaphor of fragmentation. And symbolically, a calligrapher who gave his life to an extraordinary work of art did not even sign his name. So in a way, this calligrapher for me became all calligraphers. And I wanted to do something about it. So I wrote the Blue Manuscript. It is bridging across time and place. It is bridging between the 10th century and the 20th century. It is bridging between, the emotion of a person, in the 10th century and a person in the 20th century, in the hope of bringing together our interconnectedness and our shared humanity. So the Blue Manuscript, which came out about 8 months ago, it has traveled the world, and I am quite a traveler, but it has traveled much more than me in 8 months. That's the power of the book. And one of the joys I have is when I see that it is being read somewhere in New Zealand, and it's in somebody's bedroom and it's probably resting in somebody's chest. You know that the power of the word is something else. So the story is that of a group of archaeologists, an international group of archaeologists who are from English, Irish, American, German, Japanese. They traveled to Cairo, and from Cairo to the Western Desert, a remote place where there is nothing, where they start digging for the Blue Manuscript. So the narrative moves between the 10th century and the 20th century. In the 20th century, the archaeologists are digging away and looking for the Blue Manuscript. In the 10th century, we have the calligrapher writing the Blue Manuscript. And for a calligrapher, time doesn't exist. And we wonder, is he ever going to finish the Blue Manuscript? Is there going to be a Blue Manuscript? I can't tell you. But then you have the archaeologists digging. Are they going to find the Blue Manuscript? I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that the narrative, just like the archaeological stratas, it is going in layers that lift, and all this peeling and paring away, as the layers lift, the layers of the narrative also unfold, and we learn more in this journey of discovery about our differences and our similarities. And now I would like to read two short extracts from the Blue Manuscript, which the Blue Manuscript is really like a tapestry. It's an intense, it's a dense world itself needs to be excavated. But this tapestry, this woven canvas has got so many threads, and one of the running threads throughout is the theme of language. Language that, as a means of communication, language as a tool that transcends boundaries and that crosses worlds, language that bridges gaps. And we have a translator who is doing that constantly in the dig, crossing between worlds and translating, called Zohra. And she is half Arab, half English. She's all the time translating between the two worlds. And by, the nature of her situation, her father is English, as I said, and her mother is English and her father is Arab. And so she's all the time in that gap. She says, I was brought up in a war zone. My mother the West, my father the East. I grew up in the chasm that separated them. There was a moment of silence before Zohra continued. When I was 3, so I was told, I started to recognize the existence of two languages. I would point at bread, look at my father and say, khubz. I would look at my mother and say, bread. So these two worlds that become visible, and invisible according to whether one speaks the language or not, is a fascinating phenomenon because we take it for granted. Let's say I stand here and I speak to you in English, and what a joy to be able to reach you through this English. لو كان اتكلمكم بالعربية الحين ولا واحد حيفهم أنا ولا فيكم ناس تتكلم عربي هنا؟ There you are. متشكرة قوي، لكن أنا اتكلمت مصري بس أنا مش مصرية. ما أنت شايفة. So even within Arabic, there are all these dialects, and the woman and myself just now we spoke in Egyptian dialect. So that variety within, the Arabic itself, the classical Arabic that is understood all over the Arab world, but the dialects within it's the diversity. It's the unity that holds the diversity, basically. And they are not opposing each other. They are one in the other. And what I'm hoping to do with my work is bridge those, worlds, hopefully, in my little way. Apart from Zohra, who by, the nature of her own reality being half-half, there is also the soothsayer, or the fool whom everybody thinks, just is talking nonsense, but is in the village, but is actually saying a lot of wisdom. He sits next to a tree and he talks to the so-called tree of wishes. The tree of wishes is believed to have been planted by Jesus, is venerated both equally by Christians and Muslims. And it was the tradition in the village that people tied ribbons in the branches of the tree when they have a wish. They make a wish and they tie a ribbon and their wish comes true. Couldn't we all do with a tree like that? So here is what Gaber, his name, says to the tree of wishes, just to give you another example of the theme of language, which is just one of the strands of the tapestry. The tree of wishes stood steadfast, its boughs like arms forever spread towards the sky, its branches stretched upward in an irregular yet harmonious symmetry. Tree of trees, This is how the story of the four people and the translator goes. Amgaber lifted his head. The multicolored ribbons of the Tree of Wishes, cut from the clothes of different people, danced in unison. Four men sat together talking in the market when a coin was dropped among them. They rejoiced at their good fortune. I will buy some inab, said the Arab. The Persian objected. I don't want inab, he said. I want to buy some angur, the Turkish protested. I don't want either of those. I want uzum, he cried. Well, I want stafil, said the Greek. And the fight broke out between them. A gifted translator, fluent in all languages, would have reconciled their argument. He would be able to tell them that each had wanted the same thing, grapes. Tree of trees, how many people of different nationalities speak the same language, and how many people from the same background are separated by their common tongue. And I would like to finish with the calligrapher of the Blue Manuscript, to whom this work of fiction hopes to pay homage. In his way to follow this theme, this strand of language that runs through the book, this language as a tool of communication, as a tool of bridging. In the case of the calligrapher, who is into his art, into his visual art, who goes on tracing the letters, hoping to achieve equilibrium on the page, who is working with beauty, and who is transforming the language into a visual language that everyone can relate to. Here he is with some of the pages just after he completed them. The pages completed so far were spread around him like autumn leaves. Ibn al-Warraq studied them. Arabic in its sublime form, speaking even to those who do not speak it, opening finer perception beyond language, the experience of silence in its wholeness, to speak without the need for grammar. When the line is mute, its voice is deeper than the letters, and those whose life cannot be expressed by literature can relate to it. The silence of this manuscript is the silence of the whole world, silence like that imposed by an immense landscape that lifts our being into a state of grace, purifying it, and to which human beings of any race, creed, or religion can relate. Ineffable, a sacredness for all, a sacredness for all. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Did they call you? My question is, you have so much knowledge about art, literature. Do you find when you're writing that there's a conflict between you're putting in too much detail and telling the story? Was there a time when you started where you were putting too much detail and your editor said, don't do that? Just interested in how you got into your writing.
Well, as I said, as an art historian, I could have written an art history book about the so-called Blue Manuscript, even if I was touched by the book. But I didn't, because precisely I'm not really interested in information as much as I'm interested in transformation. And this space of creativity was precisely a space to do that. The detail, why the detail? Not as an accumulation of information in itself, because that you can just tap into any source and get more and more information, and we are bombarded by information all the time. But as I said, the fact that this book is like a tapestry, and it is a tapestry of many, many tiny, tiny, tiny knots, it's full of detail. And detail, I love detail because it is something that beckons us to look closely and to pay attention to the things that seem not to matter, but in fact do. And in our approach of discrimination, we tend to ignore the little things. And in fact, very often, the little things hold the world. The detail can hold the world. The microcosm really holds the world. And in that sense, it is a book that is full of detail, but not in terms of information, accumulation of information. It is in terms of, close, it's a close, intimate invitation to look at the little things that perhaps, just perhaps, hold, the meaning of the bigger things. And to answer the second part of your question, whether my editor interfered, actually, I was very lucky to have a very good editor in the sense that whatever improvements he tried to do, he never interfered with the core of the book, with the essence, with the spirit of the book. And although the book, for example, is written in English, it is not English. It is English with, a different spirit that comes from the outside, really. And that he was left intact. So in the information and details and so on, he left, because also in terms of art history and so on, in a way it gives credibility, to the book, that what the dye is made of, what the vellum is, how it is prepared, how all these, things that you take for granted, they give credibility to the story, but not as a name in itself. And I agree with you that one shouldn't use these things just because I know I'm going to put it in the book. That would be disaster.
Are you going to translate it into Arabic?
It's actually been just translated into Arabic, and I have the manuscript on my desk.
Did
and
you do it?
No, not at all.
Did you work with a translator?
I worked in terms of the principle, and now I just got the manuscript back. And I tell you, it's a very difficult situation because when you speak the language, as far as I'm concerned, it's over. And then at the same time, there is a responsibility, especially in relation to the Arabic. I speak, classical Arabic, no problem. When I saw the Korean translation, the other translation, I have no responsibility, at least. But with the Arabic, it's very, very difficult because there are a lot of nuances that are difficult, and because the book is thought in English, it is not thought necessarily in Arabic. And so certain metaphors, the play of words, which, for example, you take a word and from the sound of the word in English, you are making another, deduction, and you're building on that. So how do you translate that? So lost in translation is one of the problems that this book will probably suffer from. But on the other hand, I think that, the translator actually did a good job from what I saw so far. The nuance is what needs to be probably adjusted.
Thank you.
But it is a responsibility, and it's a good question because these languages are sorry. No. Yes, it's. Yes. how to make the ordinary person relate to art. I can tell you one thing, that a lot of art historians don't relate to art. Specialist way. Oh, yes. Actually, that's precisely one of the driving forces for me, because the Islamic art field is small world. It is like any world that is a specialized world. It's, you know, it's contained. It's got boundaries. And for me to take this and release it and to give you, to give it to all of you, it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling, because we cannot say that beauty has to be elitist. Why? The ordinary person. Who is the ordinary person? We are all ordinary deep down. And beauty is something, when the heart is open, it can relate to it, So it is not ordinary, elitist, or who went to which university. It is whether the heart is open or not. And mind you, the question of aesthetics is another complex question, because precisely beauty that came from the Islamic world, and one of the things of being specialized in the Islamic art field, and someone who comes from that culture, to actually have been able to be in this beautiful world, this world that is full of beautiful things that were made from the 7th century to, let's say 19th century and so on. And then, for example, funnily enough, I studied English literature in Tunisia, but I studied Islamic art in London. So I was always looking at the other side, from within and from without. It's a fascinating schizophrenic exercise which gets you out of yourself and also makes you try to look at, what's happening in your way of perception. How are you looking at the thing? Because the picture is not just the look of the world, it's our way of looking at it. So when it comes to that seeing of this beautiful stuff, I am studying in London, doing my doctorate, but in the last decade, our television screens are filled with ugliness related to the Islamic world as a result of a lot of distortion from within and from without, again. And so, when it comes to the question of beauty that you just raised, precisely, I would like to give this beauty as a gift, because that beauty came from within the thinking of the Islamic, religion and philosophy. The first word that the Archangel Gabriel spoke to Prophet Muhammad, the first word of the Quran is Iqra, read.
It's not on. Okay. This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.